Listen to me, not for comfort, not for motivation, but for truth. Because truth doesn't care how you feel. Truth doesn't adjust itself for your emotions. Truth cuts straight through illusion. You've been saying you're stuck. Stuck in life, stuck in habits, stuck in your mind. But hear me clearly, stuck people don't scroll for hours. Stuck people don't waste time with discipline. You are not stuck, you are trained. And what you've trained is what your life has become. Listen, let's go deeper now. Because what I'm about to say might break the story you've been telling yourself for years. You say you are stuck. Stuck in life, stuck in habits, stuck in your situation, stuck in your mind. But let me ask you something honest. If you are truly stuck, then why do you have control over distraction? Why can you pick up your phone instantly but struggle to pick up discipline? Why can you scroll for hours without stopping, but can't sit with your goals for 30 minutes? Why is it that when it comes to wasting time, you are consistent, but when it comes to building your life, you suddenly become confused? Think about that. Because right there, the illusion breaks. You are not stuck. You are selective. You are disciplined, but in the wrong direction. That's the truth nobody told you. Because a stuck sounds innocent. It removes responsibility. It makes life look like something that happened to you. Like you are a passenger. Like you are waiting for something outside to change. Waiting for motivation. Waiting for opportunity. Waiting for the perfect moment. But life doesn't change through waiting. Life changes through action. And action requires ownership. And ownership is uncomfortable because it removes excuses. Every decision you made yesterday created today. And every decision you make today is building tomorrow. You are not stuck, you are repeating. Repetition creates identity. And your current identity is built on repeated choices. Not one mistake, not one failure, but hundreds of small decisions that you didn't take seriously. One delay became another delay. One distraction became a habit. One excuse became a pattern. And now that pattern feels like you. But it is not you, it is training. Every time you chose comfort, you strengthened comfort. Every time you avoided effort, you strengthened avoidance. Every time you said a later, you strengthened delay. And now it feels automatic. That is why it feels like you are stuck. Because you are no longer deciding consciously, you are reacting automatically. But here is the truth. What was trained can be untrained. What was repeated can be replaced. But only if you interrupt the pattern. Not tomorrow, not next week. Not when you feel ready, now. Because every day you wait, the pattern gets stronger. And the stronger the pattern becomes, the more it feels like identity. But it is not identity, it is repetition. And repetition can be broken, but breaking it requires discomfort. Because your brain will resist change, it will pull you back to comfort, back to delay, back to distraction. But comfort is not safety. Comfort is stagnation. Growth feels uncomfortable because it is unfamiliar. And unfamiliar feels like danger, even when it is progress. That is why discipline feels hard, not because it is complicated, but because it is new. And anything new feels threatening at first. But if you push through that resistance, something changes, not outside first, but inside. Your identity starts shifting, one action at a time, one decision at a time. One moment of discipline at a time. And slowly, you stop being the person who reacts and become the person who decides. That is where real control begins. And once you gain control, you realize something powerful. You were never stuck. You were just repeating what you never questioned. And anything repeated can be replaced. But cycles are not permanent, they are patterns. And patterns can be broken, but only if you stop reacting and start deciding. Now listen, this is where it gets uncomfortable. Because now we are not talking about theory. We are talking about your actual life. Your actual life. Your actual habits. Your actual daily behavior. And this is where truth becomes heavy. Because you can lie in words, but you cannot lie in repetition. Your habits always tell the truth about you. Always. You don't become disciplined by accident. And you don't become undisciplined by accident either. Either. Both are built the same way. Repetition is the silent builder of identity. And right now, your repetition is exposing you. Not your potential, not your intentions, your repetition. Look at your day honestly, not the version you imagine, the version you actually live. When you wake up, what do you do first? When you have free time, where does your attention go? When something feels difficult, what is your instinct? Because those answers are your real identity, not what you say, what you repeat. And here is the part most people avoid. You are always training something. There is no neutral day. There is no neutral action. Every action is training a direction. So when you choose distraction, you are training distraction. When you choose delay, you are training delay. When you choose comfort, you are training comfort. And over time, that training becomes automatic. That is why change feels hard. Because you are not just changing behavior, you are fighting a trained system. And the system does not give up easily. It resists. It pulls you back. It whispers, just relax today. Start tomorrow. You deserve a break. And those whispers feel reasonable. That is the dangerous part. Because excuses never feel like excuses. They feel logical. They feel justified. They feel deserved. But behind every adjust this once, there is a pattern forming beforehand. And behind every pattern, there is a future being shaped. You are not losing your life in one big moment. You are losing it in small agreements with yourself. Every time you break your own promise, you reduce self-trust. And when self-trust goes down, discipline becomes harder. Because now even you don't believe your own decisions. You say, I will do it. But part of you already knows you probably won't. And that internal doubt is what kills momentum. Not lack of ability, lack of trust in yourself. Because confidence is not what you say. Confidence is what you prove. And if your proof is inconsistent, your confidence will be unstable. So you keep restarting. Again and again, new plans, new motivation, new promises, but the cycle remains the same. Start, stop, regret, restart, and every restart feels like progress, but it is actually repetition. Because nothing changes until behavior changes. Not planning, not thinking, behavior, and behavior only changes when discomfort is faced instead of avoided. Because every time you avoid discomfort, you strengthen the same identity, the identity that avoids. The identity that delays, the identity that escapes, and over time that becomes who you think you are. But it was never who you are, it was what you practiced. And practice can be replaced, but replacement requires interruption. You must interrupt the pattern, you must break the automatic response. You must stop agreeing with every thought that says, not now, because not now becomes never, and never is not loud, never is quiet. It hides inside a later. It hides inside a tomorrow. It hides inside a when I feel ready. But readiness does not come first. Action comes first. Readiness follows action, always. So the real question is not, when will I feel ready? The real question is, can I act even when I don't feel ready? Because that is where discipline begins. Not in comfort, not in certainty, but in resistance. And if you can learn to act through resistance, your life will start changing faster than your emotions can stop you. Because now you are no longer reacting, you are choosing. And choice is power, but only when it is consistent. Because one good day does not change your life. Whoa. But repeated good days do. And that is where most people fail. They can act once, but they cannot sustain it. And without sustainability, nothing transforms. So you must understand, discipline is not intensity, it is consistency. Not how hard you go, but how long you stay. And right now, your pattern has been short bursts, followed by long breaks, and that creates instability. So the real shift is not doing more, it is breaking the cycle of stopping, because stopping resets everything. And you cannot afford constant resets anymore, not if you want change. You need continuity. Even when it feels boring, even when it feels slow, even when it feels repetitive. Because that is where real transformation lives, not in excitement, but in repetition without emotion. Now listen, this is the part where everything either changes or repeats again. Because now you can see it clearly. You were never stuck, you were never broken, you were never incapable. You were just repeating a version of yourself that you never stopped to question. And repetition creates identity. So if your repetition was weak, your identity became weak. Not because you are weak, but because your actions trained weakness. And that is important to understand, because what was trained can be untrained, but only if you stop protecting the old pattern. Because the old pattern feels safe, it feels familiar, it feels like you, but it is not you. It is just what you practiced long enough to believe it is you, and that belief is what keeps people stuck, not reality. Belief, because reality is flexible, but belief feels fixed. So you say things like, "This is just how I am," but that is not truth. That is conditioning. And conditioning is not identity. It is repetition without awareness. But now you are aware, and awareness changes everything, because you cannot unknow what you now see. You are not stuck. You are not trapped. You are not behind. You are simply facing the result of your past repetition. But here is the most powerful truth. The same system that created your current life can create a different one, because the system is still yours. Your choices, your actions, your responses, and every one of those is still under your control. But control only matters when it is used. And most people don't use it. They feel it, but they don't act on it. They see what needs to be done, but they wait for motivation. And motivation is not coming to save you. Motivation is not reliable. Motivation is not stable. Motivation is not discipline. Motivation is a feeling. And feelings change, so if your life depends on feelings, your life will always be unstable. But discipline does not depend on feelings, it depends on decision. And decision is power, because a decision made once and repeated daily becomes identity. So now the question is not, can I change? The question is, will I change what I repeat? Because everything you want is on the other side of repetition. Not knowledge, not awareness. Repetition requires discomfort, because your old self will resist. It will say, go back. This is hard. You don't need this. And that voice will feel like you, but it is not you. It is the version of you that survives on comfort, when comfort will always try to protect itself. But comfort is not your future. Comfort is your past trying to stay alive, and growth demands that it dies. Not violently, but through replacement. One new habit, one new action, one new decision. And when nothing changes, frustration builds. You start questioning yourself. You start doubting your ability. You start saying, maybe I am not disciplined. Maybe I lack focus. Maybe I am not built for this. But none of that is true. What is true is simpler. You are trained to delay. You're trained to delay. Not incapable. Trained. And anything trained can be retrained. But retraining requires repetition against resistance. Because your old habits will not leave quietly. They will resist. They will argue. They will negotiate. They will offer comfort as a solution. But comfort is not a solution. Comfort is maintenance of the current self. And if the current self is not what you want, then comfort is your enemy. But your mind will not see it that way. Because your mind associates comfort with relief. And relief feels good in the moment, so you keep choosing it. Not because it is right, but because it feels easier. And that is where most people lose themselves. Not in big decisions, but in repeated easy choices. Now listen carefully. Every time you choose discipline, you are not just completing a task. You are building self-trust. You are proving to yourself, I do what I say. And that changes everything. Because self-trust is the foundation of confidence. Without self-trust, you hesitate. With self-trust, you move. But self-trust is fragile at the beginning. It breaks easily when you break your own promises. That is why inconsistency hurts you more than failure. Failure teaches. Inconsistency confuses. Because failure is one event, but inconsistency is identity confusion. And when you confuse yourself enough times, you stop trusting your own direction. So even when you want to change, you hesitate. Not because you lack knowledge, but because you lack internal certainty. And certainty only comes from repetition. Now understand this deeply. Your life is not controlled by what you want. It is controlled by what you repeat when you don't feel like it. That is the truth most people avoid. Because it removes excuses, it removes waiting, it removes emotional dependency, and it places responsibility back on behavior. So the question becomes very simple. When discomfort appears, What do you do? Do you move forward or do you step back? Because every time you step back, you reinforce the same identity, and every time you move forward, you weaken it. That is the entire battle. Not motivation, not talent, not circumstances, but response under discomfort. And that response is where your future is decided. Now listen, this is the moment everything either shifts or stays exactly the same. Because now you see it clearly, there is no mystery left, no confusion left, no excuse left, only truth. And the truth is simple, you are not stuck. You are not stuck. You are not trapped. You are not lacking potential. You are repeating patterns that you never interrupted, and repetition always becomes identity. So the only reason your life feels stuck is because your repetition has not changed. But here is what you must understand deeply. The same repetition that built your current life is still in your hands. In your hands. You are still repeating. You are still choosing. You are still acting. Which means you are still shaping. Nothing about your future is fixed, but everything about your present is active. And that means change is always available, not later, not when life becomes easier. Now. But change requires something most people avoid. It requires breaking comfort, because comfort will always fight back. It will try to convince you, you are fine as you are. You can start tomorrow. One more break won't hurt. But every time you believe that voice, you reinforce the same cycle. You reinforce the same cycle. And that cycle is what you are calling a stuck. But it is not stuck. It is reinforced behavior. And reinforced behavior can be replaced, but only if you stop negotiating with it. Because negotiation is where discipline dies. The moment you start arguing with your own decisions, you lose control. And once control is lost, comfort takes over. Not all at once, but gradually. One delay, one excuse, one distraction at a time, until your life feels automatic. And when life feels automatic, you stop feeling like the creator of it. You start feeling like a passenger. But you were never meant to be a passenger. You were built to lead your own life. But leadership requires discipline, and discipline requires discomfort. Because every time you choose discipline, you are rejecting comfort. And every time you reject comfort, you are building strength. Not emotional strength, structural strength. The kind that holds your life together when motivation disappears. And motivation will disappear. It always does. But discipline remains, because discipline is not a feeling. It is a decision that repeats itself. So now the question becomes unavoidable. What are you repeating? Because whatever you repeat is what you are becoming. And if you do not like what you are becoming, you must change what you repeat. Not someday, not when you feel ready, but immediately. Because delay is just another form of repetition. And repetition creates direction. And direction creates destiny. So if you continue the same patterns, you already know where they lead. Not because life is fixed, but because behavior is predictable. But if you interrupt the pattern, even once, you begin to create a different direction. And direction changes everything. Not instantly, but inevitably. Because discipline compounds, just like avoidance compounds. Just like comfort compounds, just like effort compounds, everything compounds. And right now you are either compounding discipline or compounding delay. There is no neutral position, so choose consciously, not emotionally, consciously. Because emotion will always choose easy. But awareness chooses growth. And growth is what you actually want, even if it doesn't feel comfortable. So understand this clearly, the life you want is not blocked. It is not hidden. It is not unavailable. It is waiting on your behavior to change. And behavior changes through repetition. So the next time you feel resistance, do not step back. Step forward. The next time you feel delay, do not negotiate. Act. The next time you feel comfort pulling you, do not obey it. Break it. Because every time you break comfort, you strengthen discipline. And every time discipline is strengthened, your identity shifts. Slowly, quietly, but permanently. Until one day you no longer recognize the version of you that used to quit easily. Because that version only existed through repetition. And when repetition ends, so does the identity. And that is the truth most people never realize. You are not trying to become someone new. You are trying to stop being someone you trained yourself to be. And the moment you understand that, you stop waiting, you stop hoping, you stop restarting, and you start building. Because now you see clearly you were never stuck. You were just untrained in discipline. And discipline can be trained, one decision at a time, one action at a time, one moment at a time, until your life finally reflects the identity you keep imagining, not through desire, but through discipline. Listen, now we are going even deeper, because at this point, this is no longer about habits. This is about identity, and identity is the most powerful force in your life, stronger than motivation, stronger than emotion, stronger than intention. Because identity decides what you do automatically, without thinking. And right now, your identity is built on repetition you never question. Not one moment, not one decision, but thousands of small, repeated behaviors that shaped how you see yourself. You don't act randomly, you act from identity. And identity is formed through repetition. So if you repeatedly delay, you become someone who delays. If you repeatedly avoid effort, you become someone who avoids effort. If you repeatedly choose comfort, you become someone who depends on comfort. And once identity is formed, it feels permanent. But it is not. It is just reinforced behavior. And anything reinforced can be changed. But here is the truth most people don't accept. You cannot change your life without changing your identity. Because your life is a reflection of who you believe you are, not who you say you are. Not who you want to be, who you believe you are based on your actions. So if your actions are inconsistent, your identity becomes unstable. An unstable identity leads to unstable life. That is why you feel stuck. Not because life is blocking you, but because your identity is split. One part of you wants growth. The other part wants comfort. And every day those two identities fight for control. One says, a push forward. The other says, rest today. One says, or be disciplined. The other says, delay it. And whichever voice you obey becomes stronger. Not the voice you hear, the voice you follow, because identity is not built by thoughts. It is built by obedience to thoughts. And that is where most people fail. They know what to do, but they don't consistently obey it. And inconsistency creates confusion because your brain cannot trust inconsistent behavior. So it starts hesitating, it starts doubting, it starts delaying, and that delay becomes your new default, not because you chose it consciously, but because you repeated it unconsciously. And now you are living inside that pattern. But listen carefully, patterns are not prisons, they are habits. And habits can be rewritten. But rewriting requires interruption. You must interrupt the automatic response, the you'll do it later response, the not now response, the I don't feel like it response. Because every time you accept that response, you reinforce the same identity. An identity does not change through awareness alone. It changes through contradiction, doing what your old identity refuses to do, even when it feels uncomfortable, even when it feels unnatural, even when it feels forced, because that discomfort is the sound of identity changing. Now listen, this is where most people get exposed, because when identity starts to shift, resistance shows up immediately. Not outside of you, inside of you. You will feel it the moment you try to change, that invisible pushback, that hesitation, that delay in your actions. That voice saying, not today. You can start tomorrow. You're too tired, and it will feel like truth. But it is not truth, it is resistance. And resistance always appears when identity is being challenged, because your current identity does not want to die quietly. It fights back, not loudly, but subtly, through excuses, through delay, through comfort, through overthinking, because overthinking is one of the safest forms of avoidance. It feels productive, it feels logical, it feels intelligent, but it produces no movement. And anything that produces no movement is just disguised stagnation. Now understand this deeply. Your mind is not trying to destroy you. It is trying to protect your current identity. Now understand something deeper. Your brain is always trying to minimize effort. It is designed for efficiency, so it will always prefer the easiest route. not the best route, the easiest. And that is why discipline feels unnatural at first, because discipline is not natural to the comfort system. It goes against it, it interrupts it, it challenges it. So your mind will try to pull you back, not because you are failing, but because you are changing. And change always creates friction. But friction is not failure. Friction is transition. It is the resistance between who you were and who you are becoming. And if you understand that, you stop seeing discomfort as a problem. You start seeing it as proof. Proof that something inside you is shifting. Proof that your old patterns are losing dominance. Proof that a new identity is forming. But most people misinterpret this moment. They feel resistance and they retreat. They feel discomfort and they stop. They feel uncertainty and they go back to comfort. And every time they do that, they reinforce the same identity. The identity that avoids, the identity that delays, the identity that quits early. And that identity becomes familiar. So familiar that it feels like who I am. But it was never who you are. It was what you practiced. And anything practiced can be replaced. But replacement requires persistence. Not one good day, not one strong decision, but repeated execution under resistance. Because your old self will not disappear quickly. It will fade slowly through repetition of discipline. And every disciplined action weakens the old identity, and every avoided action strengthens it. So the question is not whether change is possible. The question is, what are you strengthening daily? Because whatever you strengthen becomes dominant, and whatever becomes dominant becomes your life. So when you choose discipline, you are not just doing a task, you are rewriting identity. Yeah. And when you choose comfort, you are also rewriting identity. There is no neutral action. Everything is shaping you, everything is training you, everything is building you or breaking you. And the difference is repetition. So when resistance shows up, do not ask, why is this hard? Ask instead, what is this building in me? Because every moment of resistance is a moment of construction. And what is being constructed is your future self. Not instantly, but inevitably. Now listen, this is the final point of truth, because everything now becomes clear. There is no confusion left, no illusion left, no excuse left, only responsibility. And responsibility is not punishment, responsibility is power. Because the moment you accept responsibility, you stop being a victim of your patterns, and you start becoming the author of them. Now understand this deeply. You were never stuck, you were never trapped, you were never lacking ability. You were repeating an identity that you never interrupted. And repetition always becomes reality. So your current reality is not permanent, it is practiced. And anything practiced can be replaced. But replacement does not happen through hope. It happens through interruption. You must interrupt the old pattern, not once, not occasionally, but consistently. Because the old identity does not disappear immediately. It loses strength gradually. Through repetition of discipline, through repetition of action, through repetition of control. And every time you choose discipline, you are not just completing a task. You are weakening the old version of yourself. And every time you choose comfort, you are not just resting. You are reinforcing the same identity that keeps you stuck. So there is no neutral moment in your life. Every moment is shaping you. Every decision is building you. Every action is defining you. Not in theory, but in identity. So your mind will try to pull you back. Not because it is right, but because it is familiar. And familiarity feels safe, even when it is limiting, even when it is destructive, even when it is holding you back. So you must understand this clearly. Your mind is not always your ally in growth. Sometimes it is your protector of limitation. And if you listen to it blindly, you will stay the same. But if you challenge it, you begin to change. And that challenge is discipline, not motivation, not inspiration. Discipline, because discipline is action without emotional permission. It is doing what needs to be done, even when everything inside you says no. And that is where transformation begins. Not in comfort, not in certainty, but in contradiction. When your action contradicts your feeling, identity starts to shift. And when identity shifts, everything changes. Not instantly, but permanently. Now listen, this is where the real battle begins, not outside of you, inside of you, because every time you try to change, you don't just face the task. You face yourself, your habits, your impulses, your comfort system. And that system is powerful because it has been built over time, not in one day, not in one decision, but in thousands of small repetitions. Every time you chose ease over effort, you strengthened it. Every time you chose distraction over focus, you strengthened it. Every time you said a later instead of a now, you strengthened it. And now it reacts automatically. You don't even think anymore. You feel something difficult, and immediately your mind offers escape. Scroll, delay, rest, avoid, and it feels natural. But it is not natural. It is trained. And anything trained can be untrained, but untraining is uncomfortable. Because you are not just breaking a habit, you are breaking a dependency on comfort, a dependency on avoidance, a dependency on emotional decision-making. And that is why discipline feels heavy at the start. Because discipline removes your escape routes. It forces you to stay present with what you have been avoiding. And that presence feels uncomfortable, because you are no longer numbing anything, you are facing it. But facing it is where strength begins. Now understand something deeply. Your brain is wired for instant reward. It wants relief now, not later, not after effort, now. And that is why distractions are so powerful. Because distractions always offer immediate relief, but relief is not progress. Relief is temporary escape. And escape creates delay, and delay creates pressure. And pressure creates frustration, and frustration creates more escape. And now you are stuck in a loop, not because you are weak, but because your system is unregulated. And discipline is the regulation of that system. It is not punishment. It is structure. It is not restriction. It is control. Because without discipline, your impulses decide your direction. And impulses are unstable. They change based on mood, energy, emotion, environment. So if your life is driven by impulses, your life will always feel unstable. But discipline removes that instability. It creates consistency, even when emotions fluctuate, even when motivation disappears, even when energy drops. Discipline remains, and that is why it is powerful. Because it is not dependent on how you feel, it is dependent on what you decided. And decision is stronger than feeling when it is enforced repeatedly. But enforcement is the hard part, because your old identity will resist enforcement. It will say, take it easy. You don't need to push today. The one break won't hurt, but that voice is not your future. It is your past trying to survive, because every time you choose discipline, you weaken the old identity, and it knows it. So it fights back, not directly, but through delay, through excuses, through comfort, through overthinking, because overthinking is one of the safest ways to avoid change. It feels intelligent, it feels justified, it feels reasonable, but it produces no action. No action means no change. So the battle is not loud, it is subtle. It happens in seconds, in choices. My choices. In small decisions that seem insignificant, but are actually shaping your entire direction. And if you do not control those moments, they will control you. Not suddenly, but gradually. Until one day, you realize you are not where you wanted to be. Not because you didn't try, but because you stopped too often. Now listen, this is where it gets real. Because at this stage, you are no longer confused. You are aware, and awareness is dangerous when you do nothing with it. Because awareness without action turns into frustration. You start seeing your patterns clearly. You notice your delays. You notice your excuses. You notice your inconsistencies. And you cannot unsee them anymore. But seeing is not change. Seeing is responsibility. And responsibility creates pressure, because now you know you are the one choosing. Not life, not circumstances, not timing, you. And that truth removes comfort, because comfort depends on ignorance. But now ignorance is gone, so the mind tries something else. It starts negotiating. It says, okay, but maybe not today. A maybe when things calm down. A maybe when I feel more ready. And that is where most people lose the battle. Not because they are incapable, but because they reopen negotiation with comfort. And comfort always wins negotiations. Because comfort never demands effort. It only offers delay. And delay feels harmless in the moment, but powerful over time. Because delay does not stop your life, it slowly redirects it. One decision at a time, one postponed action at a time, one ignored responsibility at a time, until direction changes completely, without you ever noticing the moment it happened. And that is why discipline is urgent. Not because you are behind, but because every delay is a silent decision to remain the same. Now understand this deeply. Your identity does not change in dramatic moments. It changes in ordinary moments, when no one is watching, when no one is judging, when no one is clapping. Hi. Just you and the choice. Do it or delay it. And every time you delay, you strengthen the version of you that avoids discomfort. And every time you act, you weaken it. So there is a quiet war happening inside you, not between good and bad, but between comfort and discipline. Between avoidance and action, between who you are and who you are becoming. And both versions are trying to survive. But only one can dominate, not by force, but by repetition. Because identity is not decided in one moment. It is decided in repeated obedience, repeated action, repeated follow-through. And that is where most people fail. They underestimate repetition. They think change is emotional, but change is mechanical. You repeat a behavior enough times, it becomes automatic. And once it becomes automatic, it becomes identity. So right now, you are either building automatic discipline or automatic avoidance. There is no neutral setting. Every action is training something, even the small ones, especially the small ones. Because small actions are easier to ignore, but harder to reverse once they compound. And that is why your life feels the way it does right now. Not because of one big mistake, but because of repeated small permissions. Permissions to delay, permissions to avoid, permissions to stop early. And those permissions became patterns, and those patterns became identity. But now you see it. I see it. And seeing it is the beginning of change, because awareness creates friction. And friction creates choice, and choice creates direction. So the real question now is simple. When you see yourself about to delay, do you continue the pattern or do you interrupt it? Because interruption is where control returns, not comfort, control. And control is what you have been missing all along. Not motivation, not clarity. Control over the moment. And if you can control the moment, you can control the direction. And if you control the direction, you control the outcome. But it always starts here, in the moment you usually ignore, the moment you usually justify, the moment you usually delay. That is where your new life begins, or your old life continues. Now listen, this is the final truth. And once you understand this, you don't go back to the same way of living. Because everything you've been chasing was never far away. It was never blocked. It was never missing. It was just waiting for a different version of you to show up. A disciplined version, a consistent version, a controlled version. And that version was never created by motivation. It is created by repetition. Because motivation gives you a start, but repetition gives you a life. So if your repetition doesn't change, nothing changes. Not your results, not your mindset, not your future. Everything stays the same, just with more frustration. Now understand this deeply. You were never stuck in your situation. You were stuck in your response to your situation. Because life will always present difficulty, always. But discipline determines what that difficulty produces. In one person, difficulty creates excuses. In another person, difficulty creates strength. Same situation, different response, different identity. And that identity is built in silence. In private, in unseen moments, when you have a choice to stop or continue, to delay or act, to escape or face it. And every one of those moments is shaping who you are becoming. Not later, now. Because your future self is not created in the future. It is created through what you repeat today. And if you repeat avoidance, you are building a life of avoidance. If you repeat discipline, you are building a life of control. Is what changes everything. Because when you control your actions, you stop being controlled by your emotions. Stop being controlled by your emotions. And when you stop being controlled by your emotions, you stop reacting to life and start directing it. But that shift does not happen by thinking. It happens by doing, repeatedly, especially when it is uncomfortable, especially when it is boring, especially when no one is watching. Because that is where identity is built, not in moments of inspiration, but in moments of discipline without emotion. So now the truth becomes unavoidable. You already know what to do. You already know what you have been avoiding. You already know what needs consistency. The only missing piece is execution, and execution is not complicated. It is simple, but it is not easy because it demands you break the pattern of delay, the pattern of comfort, the pattern of negotiation. And when you break that pattern, you feel resistance. But that resistance is not failure. It is transformation. It is your old identity losing control. It is your new identity taking shape. And if you stay in that moment, if you don't escape it, if you don't negotiate with it, something changes permanently, not instantly, but permanently. Because discipline compounds just like avoidance compounds, and whatever you repeat becomes your reality. So if you repeat discipline, you become disciplined, not by identity first, by action first. And identity follows action. That is the truth most people never fully accept. They wait to feel different before acting different. But it does not work that way. You act different, and then you become different. Clarity exposes patterns. Clarity exposes excuses. Clarity exposes who you have been when no one is watching. And that version of you is not always who you want to face. So the mind tries to protect itself. It starts creating noise. It starts creating distraction. It starts creating urgency about things that don't matter. Because anything is better for the mind than facing itself in silence. But silence is where truth lives. And truth is what most people avoid. Now understand this deeply. Your ego is not your enemy. But it is not your guide either. Your ego is a protector of identity. Even when that identity is limiting. Even when that identity is stuck. Even when that identity is self-sabotaging. Because the ego does not care about growth. It cares about consistency of self-image. So if you have been someone who avoids effort, your ego will protect that image. If you have been someone who quits early, your ego will defend that pattern. If you have been someone who delays action, your ego will justify it. Not because it is right, but because it is familiar. Because it is familiar. And familiar feels safe, even when it is destructive. So when you try to change, you are not just fighting habits, you are fighting identity protection. And that is why change feels difficult, not because it is impossible, but because it challenges who you think you are. And when identity is challenged, resistance appears immediately. You feel doubt, you feel hesitation, you feel emotional discomfort, and that discomfort will always try to push you back to scrolling, back to delay, back to comfort, back to autopilot. But autopilot is not freedom. Autopilot is repetition without awareness. And repetition without awareness creates a life you did not consciously choose. Now listen carefully. Every time you override discomfort, you are rewriting identity, not in theory, in reality, because your brain learns through behavior, not intention, not hope, behavior. So when you feel resistance and you act anyway, you are telling your mind, this is who we are now, and your mind starts updating, slowly, but permanently. But most people never reach that point because they stop at resistance. They feel discomfort and they interpret it as a sign to stop. But discomfort is not a stop sign. It is a transition signal. It is the moment between two identities. The old one trying to stay alive and the new one trying to emerge. And whichever one you feed becomes dominant. So when you choose comfort, you feed the old identity. When you choose discipline, you feed the new one, and that battle happens daily, not in big moments, in small ones, in ordinary decisions, in quiet moments no one notices. And that is why transformation is not dramatic, it is repetitive. It is subtle, it is quiet, but it is powerful, because over time, small disciplined actions become a completely different life, and small avoided actions become the same life repeated. So the truth becomes unavoidable. You are not stuck in your life. You are stuck in your repetition. And repetition is always under your control, even if it does not feel like it. Especially when it does not feel like it. Because discipline is not built when it is easy. It is built when it is inconvenient, when it is uncomfortable, when it is resisted. And if you can stay in that moment, instead of escaping it, something begins to change inside you. Not externally at first. Internally, your self-image begins to shift. Your standards begin to rise. Your tolerance for excuses begins to shrink. And slowly you stop being someone who reacts to life and start becoming someone who directs it. Not perfectly, but consistently. And consistency is what creates power. Now listen, this is the final point. Once you see this clearly, you cannot go back to the same mindset. Because everything you were searching for was never outside of you. It was inside your response, inside your discipline, inside your ability to face yourself and stop running. Because the truth is simple. You were never running from life. You were running from yourself, from your habits, from your choices, from your patterns, from the version of you that kept choosing comfort over growth. And the reason it felt heavy is because you kept avoiding it, not because it was too strong, but because you kept stepping away from it. Now understand this deeply. Your life is not controlled by what happens to you. It is controlled by how you respond to what happens. And your response is built in silence, not in motivation, not in inspiration, in repetition. Every time you faced discomfort and stopped, you trained avoidance. Every time you felt resistance and quit, you trained weakness. Every time you delayed action, you trained delay. And now those responses feel automatic. But automation is not identity. It is training, and training can be replaced, but only through repetition in the opposite direction. So when you act in discipline, you are not just changing behavior, you are replacing identity. One decision at a time, one moment at a time, one action at a time. And at first, it will not feel natural because you are breaking familiarity and the mind resists unfamiliar behavior. But that resistance is not a warning. It is transformation. It is the sound of the old identity losing control and the new identity taking shape. Now listen carefully. There will be moments where you want to stop, moments where you feel tired, moments where you feel like delaying. And in those moments, you will hear the old version of you speaking, not loudly, subtly, suggesting comfort, suggesting escape. But that voice is not your truth. It is your past trying to survive, and if you listen to it, you return to the same cycle. But if you ignore it and act anyway, you break the cycle. And every broken cycle creates power, because discipline is not built in motivation. It is built in resistance overcome. That is where strength comes from, not from ease, but from repetition under pressure. And now the truth becomes unavoidable. You are not stuck. You are not broken. You are not behind. You are simply repeating what you have not yet decided to change. But the moment you decide and act on that decision, something shifts, not instantly, but permanently. Because identity does not change in one moment. It changes through accumulated proof. Proof that you do what you say. Proof that you act when it is hard. Proof that you do not negotiate with excuses anymore. And once that proof builds up, you stop needing motivation. You stop needing motivation. You stop needing reminders. You stop needing pressure, because discipline becomes who you are, not something you do, but something you are. And when that happens, everything changes. Your focus changes, your energy changes, your direction changes, your identity changes. And the life you once thought was distant starts becoming your reality. Not because life changed, but because you changed how you show up to life. And that is the truth most people never reach. They keep waiting for change, but change only responds to action. So now the only question left is this: will you keep running from yourself, or will you finally face yourself and become the version of you that stops stopping? Because everything you want is waiting on the other side of that decision. Not in the future, in your discipline, right now. Act! Now listen, we are at the end, but for you, this should not feel like the end of a video. It should feel like the beginning of a decision. Because everything you just heard was never meant to entertain you. It was meant to confront you, to expose you.